On March 17, 135 AD, in the scorched hills outside Betar, the last stronghold of Jewish resistance, a Roman centurion named Marcus Aurelius Corvus made a discovery that would haunt him until his final days. Deep within a cave system that had sheltered rebel families for 3 years, his tracking hounds led him to a chamber where 43 bodies lay in perfect silence, men, women, and children who had chosen poison over capture. But that wasn't what made Corvus order his men to seal the cave and swear an oath of silence. What his dogs found in the deepest chamber, scratched into the limestone walls in the rebels' final hours, revealed a secret so disturbing that it would be buried for 2 millennia. But the truth was far more terrifying than Rome ever wanted the world to know. Before we uncover the truth about the Bar Kokhba Revolt dogs, how Imperial Bloodhounds located underground resistance in 135 AD Judea, and what they discovered in those rebel cave hideouts, make sure to subscribe to Fear Sermon and ring that notification bell. We're diving into one of history's most suppressed military operations, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Also, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers across the globe. The year is 132 AD. Rome stands as the undisputed master of the known world, but beneath the surface of the empire something is festering in the province of Judea. Emperor Hadrian, in his infinite wisdom, has decided to rebuild Jerusalem as Aelia Capitolina, a pagan city dedicated to Jupiter, on the ruins of the Second Temple. Destroyed 62 years earlier, Roman architects are drafting plans for a temple to the Roman pantheon. For the Jewish population, this isn't just political oppression, this is spiritual annihilation. The streets of Judea smell of cedar smoke and dried blood. Roman legionaries patrol the ancient highways, their armor glinting under the merciless Mediterranean sun. In the marketplace of what was once Jerusalem, Latin has replaced Hebrew. Circumcision has been outlawed. The teaching of Torah has become a capital offense. The Jewish people, who had already endured one catastrophic revolt against Rome ending in 70 AD with the destruction of their temple, now face systematic erasure of their identity. In the village of Modian, northwest of Jerusalem, a man named Shimon Bar Kokhba is watching. The Romans will later call him Bar Kokhba, son of the star, a messianic title whispered among desperate people searching for salvation. To his followers, he is the prince who will restore Israel. To Rome, he will become the most dangerous insurgent the empire has faced since Spartacus. Bar Kokhba isn't a religious fanatic or a mad zealot. Historical records describe him as a calculating military commander who understands Rome's weaknesses. He knows the legions are stretched thin across the empire. He knows Emperor Hadrian is preoccupied with building projects and philosophical pursuits in Athens. He knows that Judea's terrain, riddled with caves, wadis, and hidden valleys, can neutralize Rome's conventional military advantages. What begins as scattered acts of resistance quickly evolves into coordinated warfare. Bar Kokhba's forces don't meet Rome in open battle where the legions excel. Instead, they employ guerrilla tactics that would be studied by insurgents for millennia to come. They strike supply lines. They ambush patrols in narrow mountain passes. They melt into the civilian population like ghosts, and most importantly, they go underground. The Judean wilderness is a labyrinth of limestone caves carved by millennia of water erosion. These aren't simple shelters. They're complex networks with multiple chambers, hidden entrances, and ventilation shafts. Archaeological evidence shows that Bar Kokhba's engineers expanded these natural formations, creating underground cities capable of sheltering hundreds of people for months at a time. By summer of 133 AD, Bar Kokhba controls most of Judea. He's established an independent government, minted coins declaring year 1 of the redemption of Israel, and built an army that has humiliated Rome's 6th Legion. The emperor, shocked by reports of Roman defeats, recalls his best general from Britain, Sextus Julius Severus, the most accomplished military commander of the age. Severus arrives with reinforcements from across the empire, the 5th Macedonica, the 11th Claudia, detachments from Syria, Arabia, and Egypt. Ancient historians estimate Rome eventually commits 12 legions to crushing the revolt, approximately 80,000 professional soldiers against a rebel force of perhaps 200,000 fighters. But numbers mean nothing when the enemy refuses to engage in conventional warfare. The Romans try everything. They lay siege to rebel-held towns, cutting off food and water. They crucify prisoners along the roads as warnings. They burn entire villages suspected of harboring insurgents. Yet the rebellion persists, fed by fighters who emerge from the earth itself, strike with devastating precision, and vanish back into their underground sanctuaries. Severus realizes he needs a new strategy. He can conquer the surface, but the real war is being fought beneath his feet. And to win a war underground, he needs weapons that can follow the rebels into darkness. He needs dogs. The first deployment of tracking dogs occurs in November of 133 AD, near the village of Herodium. A Roman patrol discovers a concealed entrance to a cave system after their supply mules refuse to approach a seemingly innocuous rock formation. When soldiers investigate, they find fresh water jars and still warm cooking stones, but no people. The rebels have fled deeper into the earth, down passages too narrow and dark for armored legionaries to navigate safely. A cavalry officer named Lucius Fabius, recently arrived from Gaul, suggests using the Molossian hounds his unit has brought for guarding the camp. These massive dogs, ancestors of modern mastiffs, stand nearly 3 feet tall at the shoulder and possess an acute sense of smell. Fabius volunteers to take 3 hounds into the cave system with a small team of lightly armed scouts. According to a fragmentary letter later discovered at the Roman garrison in Caesarea, what happens next establishes the template for all subsequent operations. Fabius's letter to his brother in Rome describes the descent. The hounds led us through passages where men must crawl on their bellies. The air grew thick and foul. We could hear voices ahead, women singing to children, trying to keep them calm in the darkness. The dogs began to growl, their hackles rising not from the scent of people but from something else, something they sensed in those tunnels that I cannot adequately describe in writing. The Romans emerge into a large chamber where they find 27 rebels, mostly women, children, and elderly men. The fighters have already fled through a secondary exit, but they've left behind evidence of long-term habitation, sleeping quarters, a ritual bath carved from stone, weapons manufacturing facilities. The Romans also find something unexpected, clay tablets inscribed with what appears to be a detailed map of the entire cave network, showing connections between systems throughout the region. Fabius reports his findings to Severus, and the general immediately grasps the implications. The rebels aren't simply hiding in random caves. They've created an integrated network of underground bases, connected by secret passages, supplied by hidden water sources, and defended by people willing to die rather than surrender. The caves aren't just shelters. They're the infrastructure of a shadow state. Within weeks, Rome begins breeding and training dogs specifically for cave operations. They import bloodhounds from Gaul, prized for their tracking abilities. They crossbreed them with the aggressive Molossians to create animals that both track and fight in confined spaces. Training camps are established where dogs learn to navigate darkness, crawl through tight passages, and alert handlers to the presence of humans without barking and giving away their position. A Roman quartermaster's inventory from March 134 AD lists the deployment of over 200 trained hounds to units operating in the Judean wilderness. The same document details specialized equipment, leather muzzles that allow silent breathing, protective padding for paws against sharp rocks, and oil lamps designed to be carried by handlers crawling on their stomachs. The second major incident occurs in May of 134 AD, in the cave systems near Ein-Gedi, along the Dead Sea's western shore. A Roman column led by Tribune Gaius Petronius deploys 15 hounds into a network reportedly sheltering a significant rebel force. The dogs are released at dawn. By midday, they've located an entrance that Roman engineers had missed despite 3 days of searching. What the dogs reveal changes everything about Rome's understanding of the revolt's scale. The Ein-Gedi caves contain an underground city. Multiple levels descend more than 60 feet into the earth. There are cisterns for water storage, granaries filled with wheat and barley, olive oil in sealed jars, dried fish, wine, weapons, religious scrolls carefully preserved in earthen vessels. One chamber contains a school where Hebrew letters are scratched onto pottery shards, evidence that even in hiding, the rebels are teaching their children to read and write in their forbidden language. The Romans count over 300 people in the Ein-Gedi complex. According to Petronius's official report, archived in the Imperial records, the rebels do not resist. They cannot. The Romans have sealed all known exits and are pumping smoke from burning pitch into the ventilation shafts. The choice is surrender or suffocation. But something in Petronius's report troubles his superiors. He mentions that his men found evidence the rebels knew the dogs were coming. In one chamber, they discovered fresh animal bones arranged in patterns on the floor, bones from dogs, their skulls carefully positioned facing the entrance. Around them, written in charcoal on the walls, were Hebrew words that Petronius's translator refused to explain, saying only that they were curses against the beasts of Rome. The third incident is the one that makes even hardened Roman officers uncomfortable. In August of 134 AD, a massive cave system is discovered in the hills of Judea, near the village of Bethar, which has become Bar Kokhba's final stronghold. The cave network is enormous. Preliminary explorations suggest it may extend for miles underground, possibly connecting to other systems throughout the region. General Severus personally orders the deployment of 50 dogs and 3 full centuries of soldiers, approximately 240 men. The operation is commanded by the centurion Marcus Aurelius Corvus, a veteran of campaigns in Germania and Dacia, a man who has seen the worst humanity can inflict upon itself. The dogs enter the caves on August 15th. They don't return. For 3 days, handlers call for the hounds at the cave entrances. They send in fresh teams of dogs, which also disappear. Finally, Corvus himself leads a heavily armed squad into the darkness, following the last known direction of the missing animals. In a letter to his wife, discovered centuries later in a Roman family archive, Corvus describes what he finds. The hounds lay dead in a chamber perhaps 200 paces from daylight, not killed by weapons, but by poison-laden meat that was placed deliberately along the path we would follow. The rebels knew our tactics. They knew we would send the dogs first. Beyond the poisoned animals, we found what they were meant to find, a chamber where 37 people had taken their own lives rather than face capture. The bodies were arranged with terrible precision. Each person held a scrap of parchment with a name written upon it. Not their own names, but the names of people in other caves throughout Judea. It was a message to us. For every hideout we discovered, the rebels in other locations would enact the same fate. This is when the psychological nature of the conflict shifts. The Romans are no longer hunting desperate refugees. They are engaged in a chess match with an enemy that anticipates their moves and turns their own weapons against them. The dogs, meant to be Rome's advantage, have become predictable elements in a deadly pattern. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button and share this with someone who loves dark mysteries. What we're about to uncover next reveals why Rome tried to bury this chapter of history for 2,000 years. Let's discover what happens next. The morning of March 17, 135 AD, dawns cold and clear over the siege lines surrounding Bethar. After 3 years of war, the Bar Kokhba Revolt is in its final hours. The town's walls are breached. Roman soldiers are fighting house to house against rebels who know this is their last stand. By noon, organized resistance has collapsed. Bar Kokhba himself is dead, killed in the fighting, though Roman propaganda will claim he died from divine punishment for his blasphemy. But General Severus knows the war isn't finished. Intelligence reports suggest thousands of rebels have escaped into the cave systems honeycombing the hills around Bethar. This time, the general is taking no chances. He has assembled the largest dog pack ever deployed, over 100 hounds, with handlers specially trained in cave warfare, supported by 12 centuries of infantry prepared to seal every entrance once the underground bases are located. Centurion Marcus Aurelius Corvus, despite his misgivings after the incident in August, is again chosen to lead the operation. His experience is invaluable, and Severus needs officers who won't hesitate when faced with what must be done. The orders are explicit: find the cave networks, determine if they contain rebels, seal the entrances. No prisoners. Rome wants this finished. The dogs are released at first light. They immediately pick up multiple scent trails leading into the hills. Corvus divides his forces following 3 separate pack groups. His personal squad follows 8 bloodhounds tracking what appears to be the freshest trail. Deep footprints in soft earth, broken vegetation, signs of heavy traffic within the past day. The entrance the dogs locate is masterfully concealed, a narrow crack in a rock face, partially obscured by thorn bushes and deliberately covered with stones that match the surrounding terrain. Corvus's men would have walked past it 100 times without noticing. But the hounds are certain. They paw at the stones and issue low, continuous growls that signal human presence. The Romans begin removing the concealing rocks. Within an hour, they've exposed an opening large enough for a man to enter by crawling. The dogs are sent in first, leashed this time, with handlers following immediately behind. Corvus and 10 soldiers enter third, each man carrying a lamp, weapons, and a piece of cloth soaked in vinegar to filter the air if they encounter smoke or poison. The entrance passage extends approximately 20 feet before opening into a small chamber. From there, multiple tunnels branch off in different directions. The dogs choose the leftmost path without hesitation, pulling their handlers deeper into the earth. The passage descends steeply. The ceiling lowers until the Romans must move bent double, their armor scraping against limestone walls worn smooth by centuries of water flow. Then the tunnel opens into something extraordinary. The chamber is enormous. Corvus estimates it could hold 200 people standing. The walls are worked stone, carved with architectural precision that speaks of weeks or months of labor. Alcoves are cut into the walls at regular intervals. In each alcove sits an oil lamp, and though the oil is depleted, the wicks are fresh. Someone has tended these lamps recently. But the chamber is empty of people. The dogs, however, are not satisfied. They pull toward a section of the far wall that appears solid. When Corvus examines it closely, he discovers a false wall, a stone panel mounted on wooden pegs, designed to blend seamlessly with the surrounding rock. His men remove it, revealing another passage. This tunnel is different. The walls here are covered with writing. Hebrew text, scratched and painted and carved into every available surface. Corvus cannot read it, but he understands the significance. Rebels have turned this passage into a record, a testimony, a message to whoever comes after. The passage extends 40 paces before opening into the second chamber. This is where Corvus finds the bodies. In his official report to General Severus, Corvus writes with clinical detachment, 43 individuals expired by self-administered poison. Physicians suggest family groups gathered together in final moments. Evidence of careful preparation for death. Ritual washing, prayer shawls, final letters sealed in clay jars. No signs of violence between individuals. Death appears to have been accepted calmly. But in his private letter to his wife, Corvus tells a different story. I have commanded men in battle for 15 years. I have seen what we do to our enemies and what they do to us. But nothing prepared me for the deliberateness of what I witnessed in that cave. These people faced death with more discipline than soldiers. Mothers holding children, husbands and wives with hands clasped, elderly with young. They arranged themselves with such care, such intention. And the silence. Julia, the silence in that chamber was absolute. It was as if the very air had died with them. The Romans begin documenting the scene. They catalog possessions, cooking vessels, clothing, religious items, weapons, documents. They find evidence that these 43 people had been living in the cave system for months, perhaps since the fall of Bethar. They find food storage, water collection systems, even a small area where children had been playing, dice made from carved bone, a doll fashioned from cloth scraps. But the dogs are still agitated. They pull toward another section of the chamber, toward a narrow crack in the floor that Corvus initially mistakes for a natural fissure. Upon closer examination, he realizes it's an intentional opening, a passage leading to a lower level. Corvus makes a decision that will haunt him. He orders his smallest soldier, a Syrian auxiliary named Marcus, to descend through the crack. The young man ties a rope around his waist and lowers himself into the darkness. His lamp disappears below. For long minutes there is only the sound of rope sliding over stone. Then Marcus calls up, "Centurion, you need to see this." Corvus widens the opening enough to descend himself. He emerges into a chamber far smaller than the ones above, perhaps 12 feet across, with a ceiling so low he cannot stand upright. But every surface of this chamber is covered in images and text. The walls show drawings executed with charcoal and ochre. They depict dogs, dozens of dogs, hundreds of dogs. The artists have drawn them in meticulous detail, dogs entering caves, dogs tracking people, dogs leading Romans to hiding places. And interspersed with the images of dogs are Roman soldiers, their armor and weapons rendered with precise accuracy. But it's the text that makes Corvus order his men to begin sealing the cave immediately. The Hebrew writing covers the spaces between the drawings. Though Corvus cannot read it, he finds a fragment of parchment on the chamber floor, a translation prepared in Greek, clearly intended for Roman eyes. The text is a list. It contains the names of every cave system in Judea where rebels are hiding. Each name is followed by a date and a number. Corvu understands immediately what he's looking at. It's a prediction. The rebels in this cave have documented every place Romans have used dogs to locate underground hideouts. They've recorded dates of discovery and numbers of people found. And then, most disturbingly, they've projected forward, listing caves not yet discovered, with estimated dates when the dogs will find them. The final entry on the list is dated March 17, 135 AD today. The location given is Bethar, Eastern Hills, 3rd System. The predicted number of occupants is 43. The rebels knew the dogs would find them. They knew the Romans would come today. They prepared for it, documented it, and chose poison over capture with full knowledge of what was coming. At the bottom of the Greek translation, a final sentence is written in a different hand. We die not as hunted animals, but as free people who choose our end. The dogs of Rome may find our bodies, but they cannot touch our souls. Let this record survive as testimony that we were here, that we resisted, and that we chose our fate. Corvus has the chamber sealed. He reports to Severus that the cave contained rebel bodies and should be blocked to prevent disease. He does not mention the lower chamber. He orders his men to swear an oath never to speak of what they found. But the quartermaster's records tell a different story. After the cave discovery, Roman use of tracking dogs in Judea drops dramatically. Within 3 months, most of the hounds are reassigned to garrison duty or transferred to other provinces. The breeding program is quietly discontinued. Something in that final chamber broke Rome's confidence in its own strategy. The hunters had discovered that their prey not only understood the hunt, but had mapped it, predicted it, and denied them even the satisfaction of surprise. The Bar Kokhba Revolt officially ends in the fall of 135 AD, though scattered resistance continues for months afterward. The human cost is staggering. The Roman historian Cassius Dio, writing decades later, records that 580,000 Jews were killed in battle or died from starvation and disease. 50 fortified towns and 985 villages were destroyed. The number includes those who died in the cave systems, from Roman action, from starvation during sieges, from choosing suicide over capture. Roman casualties, though less documented, are also severe. Entire legions are decimated. The 9th Hispana, one of Rome's most storied units, disappears from historical records after being deployed to Judea. Some historians believe it was annihilated during the revolt, though Rome never officially acknowledged such a defeat. In his report to the Senate, Emperor Hadrian notably omits the traditional phrase, "I and the army are well," suggesting losses so catastrophic that even propaganda cannot fully conceal them. The legal and administrative aftermath reveals Rome's determination to erase Judea itself from existence. Hadrian issues a series of decrees that collectively amount to cultural genocide. The province of Judea is renamed Syria Palestina. Jerusalem becomes Aelia Capitolina, a Roman colony where Jews are forbidden to enter except 1 day per year to mourn the destruction of their temple. The teaching of Torah is punishable by death. Circumcision is banned. Possession of Hebrew texts becomes a capital offense. But the most telling administrative change appears in military records. In 136 AD, General Severus issues new standing orders for all legions operating in the eastern provinces. The regulations, preserved in papyrus fragments discovered at military installations in Egypt and Syria, contain a curious directive regarding the use of animals in warfare. The directive reads, "Hounds employed for tracking purposes and operations against civilian populations shall not be deployed in cave or underground systems where civilian casualties may result. Units are advised that such operations have proven strategically ineffective and pose unacceptable risks to morale and operational security." The language is bureaucratic, but the implication is clear. Rome is quietly acknowledging that the dog operations produced results that damaged its own forces psychologically. Soldiers who witnessed the outcomes, the mass suicides, the prepared deaths, the eerie silence of chambers where entire families had chosen poison over capture, came away traumatized. The dogs had been too effective, leading Romans to scenes that even hardened veterans found disturbing. A fragment from a Roman officer's diary discovered in the 19th century at a site near Jerusalem provides insight into the psychological toll. "We have won the war but lost something in the winning. The men who went into those caves are not the same men who came out. They flinch at darkness now. They refuse to eat meat they have not seen prepared. At night they wake screaming from dreams of silent chambers and the smell of almond, which is the smell of the poison the rebels used." Severus says we crushed the rebellion, but something was crushed in us as well. The fate of centurion Marcus Aurelius Corvus illustrates the personal aftermath. Military records show he requested and was granted early retirement in 136 AD, unusual for an officer in his prime. He returns to his family estate in northern Italy and lives for another 20 years in relative obscurity. But his will, preserved in the family archive, contains a strange provision. A substantial sum is left to a Jewish community in Rome for the maintenance of a memorial, with instructions that it should honor those who chose freedom in darkness. His descendants later report that Corvus refused to allow dogs on his property, and would leave any room where canines were present. In his final years, he composed a memoir that his family burned after his death, following instructions in his will. Only one fragment survives, copied by a grandson who disobeyed the order. "The empire says we defeated the rebels in Judea, but I know the truth. They defeated themselves, and in doing so defeated us more thoroughly than if they had won in battle. They denied us the victory of their submission. That was their final weapon, and it was more powerful than anything Rome could deploy against them." The broader investigation into the revolt suppression reveals systematic evidence destruction. Imperial archives that should contain detailed records of the final year of fighting show curious gaps. Reports from units operating in the Judean wilderness during 135 AD are missing or heavily redacted. The official casualty figures are suspiciously round numbers. 580,000 dead is almost certainly an approximation, possibly concealing a higher toll that Rome found embarrassing to acknowledge. Archaeological evidence discovered in the 20th and 21st centuries fills some gaps. Excavations of cave systems throughout modern Israel have revealed the physical reality of the underground resistance. The caves of letters near the Dead Sea yielded documents from the Bar Kokhba administration, land deeds, military orders, personal letters, proving the revolt established a functioning government. The Cave of Horrors, discovered in 1960, contained the skeletal remains of over 40 people, precisely matching Roman reports of mass suicides. Most disturbingly, several caves contain evidence of Roman fire attacks, layers of ash and burned bones suggesting that when sealing caves proved difficult, Romans simply lit fires at entrances and let smoke and heat do their work. The skeletal remains show people died fleeing deeper into cave systems, away from the flames, until they reached dead ends where entire families perished together. Yet even with modern archaeological evidence, the specific operations involving tracking dogs remain difficult to verify. No dog remains have been conclusively identified in the cave systems. The Hebrew text found on cave walls has been translated, but most consists of prayers, biblical quotations, and administrative records. If rebels left specific testimony about Roman dog tactics, it has either deteriorated, been removed, or remains undiscovered in caves yet to be excavated. What is documented is the change in Roman military doctrine after Judea. Subsequent operations against insurgencies across the empire show Rome avoiding tactics that might produce mass civilian casualties in confined spaces. When facing the Marcomannic Wars in the 160s AD, Roman commanders explicitly avoided pursuing enemy forces into forest caves, citing lessons from the Eastern campaigns. The Imperial military learned something in Judea that altered its approach to counterinsurgency, and that something appears connected to the psychological cost of what soldiers witnessed in those underground chambers. The legal proceedings against rebel leaders, those who survived to be captured, were notably swift and brutal. Hadrian ordered all prisoners of rank to be sent to Rome for public execution. Those who died in the caves were, in a sense, the fortunate ones. Captured fighters were crucified along the roads of Judea in numbers so vast that the province ran short of wood for crosses. Some were sent to amphitheaters to die in staged battles against gladiators. Others were sold into slavery and scattered across the empire, deliberately separated from their families to prevent any continuation of resistance. But no trials ever addressed the question of what happened in the caves. No official inquiry examined why rebels chose mass suicide over capture, or what that choice revealed about Roman occupation policies. The Senate received reports of victory and suppression. The details of how that suppression was achieved remained buried in military archives, or, more likely, in the sealed caves themselves. The Bar Kokhba Revolt and its brutal suppression marks a turning point not just in Jewish history, but in Rome's relationship with conquered peoples. The revolt demonstrates that a sufficiently motivated population, even one facing impossible military odds, can force an empire to pay a devastating price for victory. The immediate impact on the Jewish diaspora is catastrophic. The population of Judea, already decimated by the revolt of 70 AD, is reduced by more than half. Survivors flee to Babylonia, Egypt, Greece, and Rome itself. The dream of an independent Jewish state in their ancestral homeland dies in the smoke-filled caves of the Judean wilderness. It will not be seriously revisited for over 1800 years. Yet the revolt's legacy persists in ways Rome never anticipated. The story of Bar Kokhba becomes part of Jewish historical memory, transmitted through oral tradition and religious teaching. While rabbinic authorities are often critical of Bar Kokhba for bringing catastrophe upon the people, they preserve the memory of Jewish resistance against overwhelming odds. The caves become symbols, physical spaces where people chose to die as free Jews rather than live as Roman subjects. The tactical lessons of the revolt influence military thinking for centuries. The effectiveness of guerrilla warfare against conventional forces, the use of terrain to neutralize numerical superiority, the psychological impact of an enemy willing to die rather than surrender, all become part of the strategic calculus of insurgent movements throughout history. From the Jewish zealots at Masada to resistance fighters in every subsequent age, the principle that choosing one's own death can be a form of victory resonates across time. The use of tracking dogs in counterinsurgency operations, pioneered in Judea, becomes standard practice in later conflicts. Medieval armies use hounds to hunt rebels in forests, Colonial powers employ dogs to track escaped slaves and indigenous resistance fighters. The German Nazis used dogs at concentration camps. The Americans use them in Vietnam. Yet each application carries an echo of the Judean caves, the understanding that using animals to hunt humans creates a psychological boundary that, once crossed, affects both hunters and hunted in ways that transcend tactical considerations. Modern archaeological discoveries have brought renewed attention to the revolt's final chapters. The excavation of the Caves of Letters in 1960 yielded the archive of Babatha, a Jewish woman whose legal documents and personal papers survived because she carried them into the caves when fleeing Roman forces. Her archive reveals the human dimension of the revolt, ordinary people making impossible choices, trying to preserve their property deeds and marriage contracts even as their world collapsed. The discovery of additional cave systems continues into the 21st century. In 2016, archaeologists announced the excavation of a cave near Jerusalem that contained coins from the Bar Kokhba period, along with what appeared to be a mass grave. DNA analysis of the remains is ongoing, but preliminary results suggest genetic diversity consistent with refugees from multiple regions gathering in final hiding places. What these discoveries reveal is the systematic nature of Roman suppression. This was not a series of random military operations, but a coordinated campaign to locate and eliminate every pocket of resistance. The deployment of tracking dogs was part of a broader strategy that included siege warfare, scorched earth tactics, and the deliberate targeting of civilian populations supporting the rebels. The ethical questions raised by Judea's suppression resonate through subsequent history. When does counterinsurgency become genocide? At what point does military necessity cross into war crimes? The Romans would have rejected such categories. They operated within their own ethical framework, where rebellion against imperial authority justified unlimited force. But the testimony of Roman soldiers like Corvus suggests that even by their own standards, something about the cave operations troubled the empire's conscience. The parallel with modern conflicts is unavoidable. The use of advanced technology to hunt insurgents hiding among civilian populations, the moral calculus of collateral damage, the psychological cost borne by soldiers ordered to implement policies they find disturbing. These are not ancient questions. They are contemporary realities, playing out in conflicts across the globe. What happened in the caves of Judea in 135 AD speaks to fundamental questions about resistance and power. The rebels understood they could not defeat Rome militarily, but they could deny Rome the satisfaction of their submission. By choosing suicide, they transformed from victims into agents of their own fate. The psychological impact of this choice, on Roman soldiers, on the imperial administration, on subsequent generations, suggests that even the most powerless possess a final weapon that power cannot fully counter. The suppression of the Bar Kokhba Revolt also reveals how empires write history. For centuries, the revolt was known primarily through Roman sources that portrayed Bar Kokhba as a false messiah whose hubris brought disaster on his people. Only with the archaeological discovery of rebel documents did a more nuanced picture emerge, of organized resistance, functioning government, and people fighting not from religious fanaticism, but from a determination to preserve their identity against enforced assimilation. The caves themselves have become heritage sites, visited by thousands annually. They are spaces of memory, where the abstract concept of historical resistance takes physical form. Standing in a cave where families died together 2 millennia ago creates an immediate connection to the past that no written account can fully convey. The silence in these spaces is not empty. It's weighted with the knowledge of what happened there. The broader implications for understanding human nature are profound. The Bar Kokhba Revolt demonstrates both the worst and best of humanity. The worst, the imperial arrogance, that believes cultural erasure is acceptable policy, the military efficiency that can systematically hunt down defenseless people, the bureaucratic language that conceals atrocity. The best, the courage to resist when resistance is hopeless, the determination to maintain dignity in the face of annihilation, the choice to die on one's own terms rather than accept subjugation. Perhaps most significantly, the revolt reveals that historical truth resists suppression. Rome sealed the caves, destroyed the records, renamed the province, and forbade the teaching of the history. Yet the story survived, transmitted through Jewish communities, preserved in fragmentary Roman accounts, and ultimately proven by archaeological evidence emerging from the earth itself. The dogs of Rome found the caves and led soldiers to their prey. But they also led us, across 2,000 years, to a truth that empire could not bury, that the human spirit, confronted with the choice between submission and death, sometimes chooses death. And in that choice achieves a victory that transcends the merely military. What do you think drove the Jewish rebels to such a choice? Poison over capture, silence over plea for mercy. Was it purely religious conviction, or something deeper about human dignity and the refusal to be conquered even in death? Leave your theories in the comments below, and if you know of other historical events where people chose their own end rather than submit to power, share those stories too. Our community thrives on discovering these dark chapters of history that reveal profound truths about the human condition. Subscribe to Fear Sermon for more lost chapters of history, the stories that empires tried to erase, the testimonies that survived against all odds, the moments when ordinary people faced impossible choices and became extraordinary through their resistance. The caves of Judea are still there, silent witnesses to events that changed the course of history. Next time, we'll explore another chapter from humanity's darkest hours, another story that someone tried very hard to make sure you would never know. See you in the next video. Until then, remember, history belongs to those who refuse to let it be forgotten.